This was the moment everything was supposed to change for the better. I am Sarah Jenkins, 34 years old, and I was standing on the altar dressed in a custom silk gown that cost more than I cared to admit. The room was silent, waiting for the vows. But then the silence broke. Not with music, but with the sound of a microphone being cleared. My dad stepped forward not to give me away, but to take something away. His diamond ring caught the harsh afternoon light as he unfolded a legal document. Next to him, my brother had his phone up, capturing the entire scene, treating my wedding like a live YouTube prank. My dad looked directly at me. I could hear the sharp inhale from my bridesmaids. The string quartet hesitated mid-note. Then he declared, his voice booming across the stunned silence. "You're not worthy of being my daughter, Sarah. Effective immediately, I am cutting all legal and financial ties with you. This is my wedding gift." He thought he was writing my ending right there on that altar. He didn't realize he just signed his own foreclosure notice. I folded the document once, twice. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked straight into my brother's camera, forcing a smile that felt colder than Chicago in January. I said loud enough for his live stream to catch every word, "Don't celebrate too soon." They thought they'd just canceled my future. They had no idea they'd just activated their own termination clause. Keep watching until the end to witness a full corporate takedown. Hit that subscribe button and like this video now. You don't want to miss the cold, hard proof. 15 years ago, the foundation of this betrayal was laid. The cold smile I offered my brother Michael's camera didn't come from shock. It came from years of measured expectation. Robert Jenkins. My father wasn't just a failed real estate developer. He was a narcissist who measured human worth strictly in quarterly returns and public appearances. And I, Sarah Jenkins, was always the negative entry on his ledger. Michael, my older brother, was the golden child. He's a couple of years older than me, but emotionally, he's still a 10-year-old demanding attention. He failed out of 3 separate state universities, bounced 2 high-interest business loans, and still drove a BMW bought entirely on Robert's credit line. Robert called him a visionary, but everyone else saw him for what he was: a 30-something trust fund baby, living off the expected family inheritance. Robert always insisted Michael had potential, while simultaneously destroying mine. When I announced I was leaving the comfortable Chicago suburbs to study software engineering in Austin, Texas, Robert didn't just disapprove. He saw it as a personal attack. "Tech is a fad, Sarah. It's a frivolous game for children." He spat, leaning back in his Italian leather chair, the scent of cedar and old money thick in the air. "If you want a career, you stay here. If you want something, earn it yourself." I took his challenge literally. I earned it. I built ATech Solutions, a digital asset management platform, from scratch. While Michael was busy draining the family coffers, I was coding, securing patents, and building a multi-million-dollar valuation. My independent success, the fact that I thrived without Robert's money, was the biggest insult to his control. My autonomy made Michael look even more pathetic, and that in Robert's world was unforgivable. His empire was failing, a truth he desperately tried to hide. Robert's last 2 major real estate ventures, a luxury condo development in Miami and a commercial park in suburban Illinois, were hemorrhaging money due to massive over-leveraging and poor local zoning decisions. He was drowning in debt, relying on short-term high-interest loans to cover the principal on larger mortgages. His company was a financial house of cards, and the wind was picking up speed. He needed a cash infusion, a large, untraceable one, before the financial press caught on, before his bondholders called an emergency meeting. Since he couldn't sell his highly mortgaged real estate assets, his focus shifted to the only liquid asset of true value within the family sphere. My stake in ATech Solutions, valued at around $35 million at the time of our latest funding round. 6 months ago, the manipulation began subtly. Robert, under the guise of estate planning, began restructuring the Jenkins Family Trust Fund, This trust was nominally set up for both Michael and me, but Robert was the acting administrator. He quietly transferred nearly all executive control of the trust to Michael, simultaneously introducing a new aggressively worded clause concerning the protection of family assets. This clause stipulated that if I refused to sign a prenuptial agreement that included a specific provision concerning ATEC's equity, Robert, or the trust, could legally intervene to protect the family's indirect investment. He framed the prenup as a formality protecting my future husband Alex from liability. The real motive was crystal clear: use the trust as a legal crowbar to pry open my company's cap table and seize controlling interest, selling off my shares, just enough to save his failing real estate development firm. He needed to prove he could still control the little girl who dared to become successful outside his shadow. My mother, Eleanor Jenkins, signed off on all the legal adjustments as a passive trustee, showing no signs of concern or independent thought. I saw her signature, elegant, flowing, and completely complicit in his scheme. I knew then that Robert was not seeking agreement. He was engineering theft. I just needed to let him think his trap was invisible. It takes 10 years to become an overnight success. The irony wasn't lost on me. Robert had demanded I earn my worth, and in doing so, I had forged the very weapon he now coveted. ATEC Solutions. My software baby wasn't just a company. It was a fortress of legally protected intellectual property. It specialized in secure asset tracking for large institutional investors, a sophisticated platform built on proprietary algorithms that I had developed and critically patented entirely on my own, ensuring no financial or physical resources from Robert's business were ever used. I learned early that Robert respected one thing above all else: irrefutable documentation. Growing up, love was conditional, but legal documents were absolute. So when I formed ATEC, I meticulously structured the business to withstand any potential legal assault from the Jenkins family trust. The core of Robert's current scheme lay in that old dusty trust fund agreement I signed after college. To receive a modest stipend for graduate school, I had to agree to a vaguely worded intellectual property IP clause. This clause stipulated that any business I founded within 5 years, if it leveraged family assets and facilities, could be subject to an advisory oversight, potentially giving Robert controlling minority shares if his interests were threatened. Robert had conveniently stretched the definition of family assets to the point of absurdity. He argued that since the initial small cash stipend from the trust fund was used for my living expenses, while I worked on my initial coding drafts, the entire IP of ATEC was now contaminated, thus subjecting it to the IP clause. He wasn't aiming for advice. He was aiming for majority ownership to use ATEC's impending Series B funding as his personal bailout. I recall the call 3 months ago, his voice dripping with false concern. "Sarah, you're a bright girl, but this tech world is volatile. Let me protect your future before the wedding. I'll take 51% of your company purely as collateral to ensure stability." 51%. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You contributed $0 and 0 hours to ATEC." "Nonsense, Sarah. You were raised with Jenkins money. You received trust disbursements. Everything you are is a Jenkins asset." He thundered, revealing the toxic core of his philosophy. I feigned agreement, playing the role of the intimidated daughter. "The legal filings are complex, Dad. Let me have my lawyer review the transfer documents." This delay gave me exactly what I needed: time. Robert's confidence was his blind spot. He was so certain of his legal loophole that he instructed Michael to hire an external auditing firm, Michael, who couldn't balance a checkbook to find any connection between my seed funding and Robert's accounts. They found nothing, of course, because I had engineered a perfect firewall. The secret was Phoenix LLC. 3 years prior, knowing Robert's history, I incorporated a shell corporation, Phoenix LLC, which held the patents and licensing rights to the core ATEC platform. All early financial transactions flowed through Phoenix, separating the IP from any physical connection to Robert or the trust. Phoenix was the holding company, and ATEC Solutions was merely the licensee. This legal subtlety, the difference between ownership and licensing, was a detail Robert's old-school real estate lawyer would never think to check. Robert believed I was simply reviewing his hostile takeover paperwork. In reality, I was waiting for him to commit the final public act of betrayal. That act would be the receipt I needed to activate Phoenix LLC's final clause, prepared months in advance by my true advisor, David Chen. I had the upper hand, and I let Robert celebrate his delusion of impending victory. The silence of the night often conceals the loudest conspiracies. 3 days before the wedding, the final domino fell. The call came from an anonymous burner phone, an accountant formerly employed by Robert. Her voice was low, laced with panic, confirming my worst suspicions. Robert had finished restructuring the trust, ensuring Michael was positioned to be the majority voting trustee. More critically, Robert was preparing to file for a temporary injunction on ATEC's assets the day after the wedding. This injunction, leveraging the murky IP clause, would paralyze ATEC, scaring off our Series B investors and allowing Robert to step in as the savior for a minimal price. The wedding was merely the public stage for my humiliation and corporate execution. I hung up, the blood pounding in my ears. This wasn't just about money. It was about reputation, my professional life, and the destruction of everything I had built. I immediately called David Chen, my corporate lawyer specializing in IP and trust disputes. We met at his sleek downtown Chicago office at 2 a.m, the city lights below us shimmering like scattered coins. "Robert is moving faster than we calculated, Sarah," David stated, pushing a hefty binder across the desk. "He's banking on the public spectacle of your rejection. Michael live-streaming the declaration of unworthiness serves 2 purposes for them. It humiliates you publicly, and it provides proof of your father's moral obligation to protect his legacy from your supposed deception. It's textbook corporate defamation." Our contingency plan. The Phoenix Protocol was complex, but its timing was everything. We needed Robert to commit to the public defamation before we countered with the legal maneuvers. The plan hinged on 2 tactical moves: first, solidifying ATEC's complete legal separation via Phoenix LLC. Second, using the trust's own structural flaws to financially isolate Robert and Michael, cutting off their cash flow precisely when Robert needed liquidity the most. David elaborated, "Robert has used the trust as an unofficial guarantor for his massive failing real estate loans. He's commingling funds, which is a massive breach of fiduciary duty to all beneficiaries, including you. If we file an emergency petition to freeze the trust right after he publicly disowns you, we prove he's acting out of malice and self-interest, not family protection. He loses control, and his debtors panic. We needed airtight evidence of the intent to conspire, something beyond the legal documents. That's where Alex, my then-fiancé, came in. With his background in system security, Alex discreetly placed a tiny legal recording device, capturing only conversations held in the open in Robert's home office, where the final plot points were being discussed. That night, we listened. Michael's voice, grating and high-pitched, was clear. "Dad, once you pull the plug and say she's a fraud at the wedding who's going to invest in ATEC, we just swoop in and take it." Robert's response was chilling in its casual cruelty. "Exactly, Michael. It's all a show, and she's the punchline. She loses everything." David smiled, a cold, strategic glint in his eyes. "Beautiful, Sarah. Robert Jenkins just signed the death warrant on his own empire. We execute the Phoenix Protocol immediately following his declaration at the altar." The air inside the dark SUV was thick with adrenaline and the scent of expensive silk. 1 hour after Robert Jenkins finished his theatrical declaration, while the wedding guests were still exchanging confused whispers, and the Jenkins family was retreating to the venue's private suite to celebrate their perceived victory, I was not at the reception. I was 2 blocks away, strapped into the back of David Chen's black SUV. Alex, my husband now, was still at the venue, a calm presence ensuring that the spotlight remained on the spectacle they had created. The public declaration of your unworthiness served 2 purposes for us, David confirmed, tapping his tablet. It confirms public defamation, and it provides the immediate legal standing we needed to argue that Robert is acting with malice, not in the trust's best interest. It was time for Phase 1, the trust freeze. David had prepared an emergency petition for temporary supervision of trust assets. As a primary beneficiary, and based on the recorded evidence of Robert's intent to commingle trust funds for his personal business debts, a clear breach of his fiduciary duty, I had the undeniable right to demand court intervention. Within 15 minutes, David's firm securely emailed the court order, a temporary order to preserve assets to every relevant financial institution, Robert's main bank, the trust's portfolio managers, and his primary real estate lending institutions. The core Jenkins Family Trust Fund was instantly placed under immediate court supervision, effectively freezing all non-essential large-scale disbursements to Robert and Michael. The immediate feedback was satisfyingly dramatic. Michael was the first to feel it. Still basking in the glow of his infamous live stream, which was quickly accumulating negative comments, but he was too oblivious to notice, he strode up to the hotel bar to order a celebratory round of $1,000 champagne. He slapped Robert's corporate card onto the counter. Transaction declined. He tried again, furiously convinced the bartender was incompetent. Transaction declined. Michael's panicked call reached Robert just as my father was about to sign the final check to the wedding planner. Robert's pen was mid-stroke when his personal banker called. Mr. Jenkins, per an immediate order from the Cook County Superior Court, all accounts linked to the Jenkins Family Trust Fund have been frozen pending review. All large expenditures, including this check, are being rejected. Robert's initial roar of outrage was muffled, then it escalated into a panicked, high-pitched frenzy. He was cut off. The money that was supposed to save him was suddenly locked away by the very daughter he had just publicly disowned. The legal document he threw at me was supposed to symbolize my termination. Instead, it became the timestamp for his. I watched a live financial feed on David's screen showing the value of Robert's real estate stocks beginning to flicker and drop slightly as the news of legal intervention in Jenkins Trust filtered through private finance circuits. Robert had expected tears and chaos from me. Instead, he got surgical legal precision. Monday morning felt like the eye of the storm. Robert Jenkins, backed into a corner, spent the weekend frantically trying to arrange emergency financing to cover the massive shortfalls in his Florida project, only to be denied by every major institution now aware of the trust freeze. His only logical move was to push the offensive against me, hoping to intimidate me into unfreezing the funds. Monday at 9:00 a.m., Robert summoned his lawyer Charles Darrow to his outdated real estate office for an emergency strategy session. He planned to file the injunction against ATEC Banking on the fact that the legal process would take weeks, during which my company's Series B funding would collapse. I was waiting for him. I walked into Darrow's conference room unannounced, David Chen right beside me. Robert was startled, his face flushed and his posture aggressive. "You have no right to be here, Sarah," Robert hissed, slamming his fist on the polished mahogany table. "You forfeited your claim to this family." "We're here to discuss the trust's finances, Robert," David Chen countered calmly. "And your misuse of those funds to prop up your failed personal real estate ventures, which constitutes severe fiduciary misconduct." Darrow, a weary lawyer in a suit 2 sizes too big, tried to mediate, citing the ambiguity of the trust's original terms. But David wasn't interested in negotiation. We have recordings detailing the specific intent to commit defamation and fraud against a beneficiary specifically to acquire her separate company's IP. David announced, placing a sealed envelope on the table. The public humiliation at the wedding was not a moral action. It was a premeditated corporate maneuver which Michael's livestream now proves. Robert scoffed, attempting to regain control. Go ahead and sue Sarah. You'll spend years in court, and in the meantime, I'll take control of ATEC. The paperwork for the IP injunction is already prepared. Your company dies without me. This was the moment. I leaned forward, the cold veneer of my composure cracking slightly with satisfaction, but I didn't smile. I slid my document across the table. You're too late, Robert, I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the tension. I already have my injunction. Robert snatched the document. His eyes scanned the header: Cook County Superior Court order. It was a temporary restraining order TRO filed by Phoenix LLC, the shell company he never knew existed against both Robert Jenkins and Michael Jenkins. The TRO was comprehensive. It prohibited them from having any contact with ATEC Solutions, from interfering with its business operations, and most devastatingly, it contained a little clause that David Chen had cleverly tailored to Robert's immediate crisis. Furthermore, David Chen explained, this TRO, based on the prima facie evidence of your fraud, prohibits Robert Jenkins from engaging in any real estate transaction exceeding the value of $100,000 for the next 60 days, pending a full judicial review of your trust activities. Robert's color drained completely. This wasn't just a freeze, it was an economic chokehold. His multi-million-dollar closing in Indiana, his final hope for staving off bankruptcy, was now legally impossible. Michael, seeing his gravy train derail, jumped up. Dad, we need that money. The Florida project is due. Robert Jenkins, the self-proclaimed king of Chicago real estate, was utterly incapacitated, paralyzed by a legal weapon forged by the daughter he deemed unworthy. The 60-day restraint was an eternity in the cutthroat world of real estate finance. The temporary trading injunction acted like a slow-moving but inescapable wrecking ball. Unable to complete his critical Indiana land deal, Robert defaulted. He couldn't service the debt on the massive Florida project, and the news that the Jenkins family trust was under court supervision spread through his network like wildfire. Trust is currency in development, and Robert's account was suddenly empty. Within 2 weeks, Wells Fargo, Robert's largest creditor, filed a formal notice of default and foreclosure against his crown jewel, the luxury high-rise condo project in the affluent suburbs. This wasn't just a loss, it was a public declaration of bankruptcy and professional failure. The property was immediately seized. The announcement splashed across the Chicago business pages. Robert Jenkins's empire had officially begun its collapse, televised on paper thanks to the legal move I had calculated 3 days before my wedding. Meanwhile, life for Michael and Eleanor became a financial nightmare. Michael's endless stream of cash dried up. He couldn't pay his lease on the expensive downtown apartment, and his credit card companies began demanding immediate payment on his escalating debts. Debts he had always assumed the trust would cover. He turned his anger entirely on Robert, their private shouting matches echoing through their now isolated mansion. 3 weeks after the injunction, Eleanor Jenkins called me. Her voice, usually smooth and placid, was thin, bordering on hysteria. Sarah, please, you have to stop this. Your father is completely lost, she pleaded. He's talking about losing the house. Can't you just release the freeze? We are family. Family. I repeated the word, letting the contempt solidify in my tone. Family is when I was humiliated in front of hundreds of people, publicly labeled a fraud, and you stood beside him silent. Family is when you both signed documents attempting to steal the intellectual property of my company, my life's work, to bail out his failed ventures. Eleanor switched tactics, resorting to emotional blackmail. He did it for us. He was trying to secure the family legacy. He loves you, Sarah. He just expresses it poorly. He expresses his self-interest perfectly, Eleanor. And you, as a trustee, chose to enable it. I countered, my voice unyielding. I earned my legacy outside of your toxicity. Robert taught me that business is war, and he declared war on me. I simply finished the fight he started. I saw my opportunity and pressed the attack not for revenge, but for permanent separation. I will not retract the injunction, but here is my offer. Robert's company is gone. He will soon lose everything. You, Eleanor, have a choice. File for divorce. Separate yourself financially from his bankruptcy and his legal liability for trust fraud. If you do, David will ensure that the court-appointed trustee allocates a fair, protected living allowance from the trust for you. Otherwise, you go down with him. Eleanor gasped, the thought of divorce being an unprecedented, terrifying prospect for a woman who defined herself by Robert's wealth. I can't. Then you've made your choice, I said flatly, hanging up before she could utter another word. My separation from Robert and Michael was now final, but the separation from Eleanor was a choice she had to live with, a consequence of her decades of complicity. The end of a toxic relationship isn't a fiery explosion. It's the sound of a closing door. 6 months later, the legal proceedings concluded quietly, exactly as David Chen predicted. Robert Jenkins's company was liquidated to satisfy creditors. His major real estate developments were officially sold off by the bank via foreclosure. Due to the severity of the financial fraud and the breach of fiduciary duty concerning the trust, Robert was hit with a permanent injunction against any commercial real estate activities in Illinois and neighboring states for 5 years. He didn't just lose his wealth, he lost his career, his reputation, and his ability to work in the only field he understood. The court settlement was stark and non-negotiable. Robert and Michael were permanently banned from any involvement or contact with ATEX Solutions or Phoenix LLC. Michael lost all discretionary access to the trust fund. The remainder of the trust assets significantly diminished after paying Robert's legal fees and settling the fraud claims, was placed into a highly restricted account managed by a neutral third-party trustee, with disbursements limited to basic living expenses only. Eleanor, after weeks of paralyzing indecision, finally filed for divorce, realizing that staying meant financial ruin and possible legal liability. Her settlement was modest, just enough to ensure her survival, but she was forever severed from the high society life she cherished. I received substantial financial damages for the public defamation and the attempted corporate sabotage, a sum far exceeding anything Robert could have stolen. More importantly, the court granted a permanent, legally enforced distance between me and the Jenkins men. I had peace purchased at the cost of a wedding day spectacle. Robert Jenkins, stripped of his power, retreated from public life entirely. He now lives in a tiny condo purchased by a distant relative, a disgraced former millionaire sustained only by the occasional pity check. Michael, his reputation in tatters from the infamous live stream, became unemployable too, entitled to take an entry-level job too tarnished to get a management position. I stood in David Chen's office signing the final paperwork. The silence felt earned. I learned the biggest lesson of my life. Power is not inherited wealth or social status. Power is intellectual property, financial preparation, and the cold surgical ability to enforce legal boundaries. Robert tried to teach me that the world was transactional and cruel. He failed to realize he was teaching me how to be the most ruthless strategist in the room. Alex and I had our actual wedding ceremony on a quiet beach in the Florida Keys, just us and a handful of close friends. It was everything the Chicago spectacle wasn't: small, honest, and truly mine. I achieved absolute cutoff. No reconciliation, no forgiveness. When you deal with a toxic family, closure isn't found in a tearful embrace. It's found in the finality of a signed legal decree. That wasn't revenge. It was self-liberation. I used the resources I built to buy back my own peace. The real victory was not seeing them lose money, but seeing them lose control. For anyone out there who feels like the overlooked one, the scapegoat, the one who constantly has to prove their worth to a toxic system, this is the truth. You don't need their approval, you need your own autonomy. Stop asking for permission to be successful. Stop fighting them on their emotional battleground. Build your own fortress, a strong career, ironclad contracts, and a legal strategy that makes you untouchable. Because sometimes the most profound peace comes not from reconciliation, but from realizing that the most valuable asset you own is the distance you finally put between yourself and the people who tried to diminish you.